I've always loved Halloween. The decorations, the community spirit, the way our small town came together every year for the festival in Riverside Park, it was tradition, something I looked forward to all year. So when they asked for volunteers to help with setup, I was the first to sign up. That decision changed my life in ways I'm still trying to process. It was October 27th, 3 days before the festival, and I was stringing orange lights along the main pathway through the park. The afternoon sun was already dipping behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the fallen leaves. That's when I saw it, a carved pumpkin sitting at the edge of the woods, maybe 15 feet from where I was working. It wasn't one of ours. Our pumpkins were cheerful, perfectly carved, positioned along the path with little LED candles inside. This one was different. The carving was crude, almost violent, with jagged teeth and eyes that seemed to leer rather than smile. The expression was unsettling in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I figured some neighborhood kid had left it there. Maybe thought it would be funny to add to our decorations. I made a mental note to move it later and went back to work. The temperature was dropping fast, the way it does in late October, and I wanted to finish before dark. I didn't give the pumpkin another thought until the next morning. When I arrived at the park around 8 a.m., coffee in hand, I immediately noticed something wrong. The pumpkin had moved. It was no longer at the edge of the woods. Now it sat near the children's costume contest stage, about 50 yards from where I'd seen it yesterday. The stage was in the center of the open field, nowhere near where the pumpkin had originally been. I walked over to examine it, feeling a prickle of unease run down my spine. It was definitely the same pumpkin, same crude carving, same disturbing expression. The inside was empty. No candle, just dried pumpkin guts and that smell of rot that comes when they start to decay. Someone's messing with me, I thought. Had to be teenagers pulling a prank. I grabbed the pumpkin and carried it to the dumpster near the parking lot, tossing it inside. Problem solved, except it wasn't. The next morning, October 29th, the pumpkin was back. This time it sat directly in front of the volunteer check-in table where I'd be working. I felt my stomach twist. The dumpster was locked at night. I'd seen the Parks Department do it myself. I checked with the other volunteers, but nobody had seen anything. Nobody had moved any pumpkin. They looked at me like I was losing it, and maybe I was. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of it, proof that I wasn't imagining things. Then I carried it even further away, to the dumpster at the far end of the parking lot. And this time, I watched the sanitation truck empty it that afternoon. I saw that pumpkin get crushed in the compactor with my own eyes. October 30th, the day before Halloween, I arrived at dawn. The pumpkin was waiting for me, positioned on the picnic table directly beside where I'd parked my car. My hands started shaking. This wasn't possible. I'd watched it get destroyed. This had to be a different pumpkin, someone recarving the same design to mess with me. But as I got closer, I saw the same imperfections in the carving, the same crack running through the left eye. It was the same pumpkin, or something identical enough that the distinction didn't matter. That night, I made a decision. I was going to catch whoever was doing this. I parked my car at the far end of the lot, in a spot with a clear view of the entire festival grounds, and I waited. I'd brought a thermos of coffee, a blanket, and my phone fully charged. If someone showed up with that pumpkin, I'd see them. I'd get video evidence. I'd end this. The park was beautiful in the moonlight. All our hard work on display, the booths set up, the decorations perfectly placed, the stage ready for tomorrow's festivities. It should have felt magical. Instead, it felt like a trap. I kept my eyes on the tree line, scanning for any movement. Around 11:30, I started to wonder if I was wasting my time. Maybe the pranks were over. Maybe whoever it was had gotten bored. Then, at 11:47 p.m. exactly, I remember because I checked my phone, I saw movement at the edge of the woods. A figure emerged from between the trees, tall and impossibly thin, wearing what looked like a scarecrow costume, burlap clothes, a wide-brimmed hat, straw poking out at odd angles. The way it moved was wrong, stiff, jerking motions, like a marionette being controlled by an amateur puppeteer. It walked directly to where I'd last seen the pumpkin, near the costume contest stage. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, trying to get the camera app open. The figure bent down, that same jerking, unnatural movement, and when it straightened up, it was holding the pumpkin. The carved face was suddenly illuminated from within by a flickering orange glow, like a candle had spontaneously lit inside. Then the figure turned, directly toward my car, directly toward me. Even from 100 yards away, even in the darkness, I could see its face. The burlap wasn't a costume, it was skin, rough and textured, stretched over something that had the general shape of a human head but wasn't quite right. The carved face wasn't a mask. It was its actual face, cut into that burlap flesh, and real fire flickered from within those carved eye sockets and mouth, visible between the stitched seams. It started walking toward me, not the shambling walk of a costumed prankster, but that same mechanical, jerking gait, each step deliberate and wrong. The pumpkin dangled from one elongated hand. Its carved face pointed at me, the candlelight inside swaying, but never going out. I dropped my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip my keys. The figure was getting closer, 30 yards now, and I could hear something, a wet, rasping sound, like breathing through a damaged throat. I finally got the key in the ignition, started the engine, threw the car in reverse. My headlights swept across the figure as I turned, and in that brief moment of illumination, I saw details I wish I could forget. The burlap texture of its skin was wrong, it wasn't fabric at all, but something organic that resembled burlap, with dark fluid seeping from the carved features. The fire inside its head wasn't candle flame, but something else, something that burned with a light that hurt to look at directly. I drove home 20 miles over the speed limit, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see that figure standing in the road behind me. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes, trying to calm my breathing, trying to convince myself I'd seen a person in a very elaborate costume. It didn't work. I knew what I'd seen. Eventually, I got out of my car and walked to my garage. I stopped dead. There, sitting on the hood of my car, the car that had been locked in my garage since yesterday evening, was the pumpkin. The same pumpkin, still glowing faintly from within. My stomach dropped. I backed away, then turned and ran into my house, locking every door, checking every window. The next morning, I called the police. I told them everything, knowing how insane I sounded. 2 officers came out, searched the park and the woods beyond. They found nothing, no footprints, no evidence of anyone being there. But when they came to my house to file the report, I showed them the pumpkin. One of the younger officers reached inside and pulled out something I hadn't noticed, a small wooden figure, maybe 4 inches tall, intricately carved. It looked like me, like a miniature statue of me, perfect down to the clothes I'd been wearing, the expression on my face. The older officer went pale. He told me they'd had reports like this before, years ago, but nothing recent. He suggested I stay somewhere else for a while. The festival was canceled that day, anonymous threat called in. They said publicly, but I knew better. I moved 2 weeks later, left town, started over 3 states away, changed my phone number, deleted social media, tried to disappear. For a few months, I thought I'd escaped. Then Halloween came around again. I woke up that morning, walked out to get the newspaper, and there it was, the pumpkin, sitting on my doorstep, 3 states away. Inside was another wooden figure, same as before, but aged now, the wood darkened and cracked. The figure looked older, more worn. It's happened every year since, 5 Halloweens now. No matter where I move, and I've moved 4 times, the pumpkin finds me. The wooden figure inside decays a little more each year. This past Halloween, the figure's face was barely recognizable, the wood rotted and splitting. I don't know what happens when it decays completely. I don't know what it's counting down to. But I'm running out of time to find out, and I'm running out of places to run. The pumpkin is patient. The thing that delivers it is patient. And somewhere, I know, it's still watching me with those carved, burning eyes, waiting for the countdown to reach 0. My wife Sarah and I installed the doorbell camera in early October after our neighbor's porch was hit 3 times in 1 week. Package thieves were getting bold in our neighborhood, and the $200 investment seemed worth the peace of mind. The camera was smart, HD quality, motion activated, with 2-way audio and night vision. It synced to our phones, sent instant alerts, and stored footage in the cloud. State-of-the-art security. We felt safer immediately. Halloween night, we decided to do something different. Usually we'd sit on the porch, hand out candy face to face. enjoy seeing the kids' costumes. But this year we'd both had exhausting weeks at work, and the idea of staying inside, watching horror movies in our comfortable back den while monitoring trick-or-treaters through the camera, sounded perfect. We set up a large bowl on the porch, the good candy, full-size bars with a cheerful, "Take one, please," sign. The camera would let us see who came by, and we could still participate in the holiday without the social exhaustion. The system worked beautifully. Throughout the evening, my phone buzzed with motion alerts. I'd glance at the notification, see a few kids in superhero costumes or princess dresses approaching the porch, watch them politely take one candy bar each, and smile at Sarah. "Look at this Spider-Man," I'd say, or, "That witch costume is adorable." We felt connected to the holiday while maintaining our comfortable distance. The doorbell camera was the perfect compromise. Around 10:30 p.m., well past the unofficial end of trick-or-treating hours, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, probably just a cat or the wind, but something made me check. I opened the app and saw the live feed. A child stood at the end of our walkway, completely motionless. The costume was elaborate, unsettling. A full plague doctor outfit, like something from medieval paintings of the Black Death. Long black coat that dragged on the ground, wide-brimmed hat, and that distinctive beaked mask, stark white in the porch light, with dark glass eyepieces that reflected our front door. "Sarah, look at this," I said, tilting my phone so she could see. The figure hadn't moved, just standing there at the edge of our property, 20 feet from the porch. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The timestamp ticked upward while the figure remained perfectly, unnaturally still. "That's weird," Sarah whispered. "Is the feed frozen?" I checked. The trees in the background moved slightly in the breeze. The timestamp kept updating. The feed was live. This child, it had to be a child, based on the height, was just standing there, staring at our house. At the 3-minute mark, the figure finally moved. But the movement was wrong. Not the excited run of a kid eager for candy. Not even a normal walk. The motion was jerking, stuttering, like a video buffering and skipping frames. The figure approached our porch in this disturbing, mechanical way, each step sharp and abrupt. "Maybe it's the camera lagging?" I offered. But my voice sounded uncertain even to myself. The figure reached the porch, that beaked mask aimed directly at the candy bowl. Its hand extended gloved in black leather toward the bowl. I waited for it to grab candy. Instead, the hand hovered over the bowl for several seconds, then withdrew without taking anything. The beaked mask turned upward, tilting toward the camera. Toward us, the head tilted at an angle that made my stomach clench. Too far. Farther than a human neck should allow. The dark, glass eyes of the mask seemed to look directly through the camera lens, and even through the phone screen, I felt seen. The figure slowly raised one gloved hand and pointed directly at the camera. Not at the door, not at the house, at the camera itself. At us watching through the camera. "Jesus," Sarah breathed beside me. "That's really creepy. Is that your friend Mike's kid? Is he pranking us?" The figure held that pointing gesture for several long seconds, then turned with that same jerking, frame-skipping motion and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond our porch light's reach. The entire interaction had lasted maybe 2 minutes, but my heart was racing like I'd just run a sprint. "I'm checking the porch," Sarah said, standing up. "Wait." I grabbed her arm. Let's wait a minute." I don't know why I said that. Something about the footage had crawled under my skin, the way the figure moved, the way it had turned to face the camera so directly, the way it had pointed at us. Sarah must have heard something in my voice because she sat back down, and we waited until morning. When we finally opened the front door the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the absence of the candy bowl. The entire bowl was gone, not just emptied, taken completely. In its place, in the exact spot where the bowl had been, was a photograph. An old photograph, water-damaged and warped, showing our house taken from the exact angle of our doorbell camera. The perspective was identical, but the photo quality, the paper texture, the faded color, everything about it screamed old. I turned it over, stamped on the back in faded red ink, the 31st of October 1983. I felt ice in my veins. Our house was built in 1998. We had the original construction permits in our files. In 1983, This lot was empty land. There's no way this photograph could exist. Someone's really committed to this prank, Sarah said, but her voice shook. I pulled out my phone, opened the doorbell app, and started reviewing the footage from the beginning of the evening, looking for any clue about who might have left the photo. That's when I noticed something that made my hands go numb. I watched the first clip, a group of young kids dressed as dinosaurs approaching the porch. In the background, at the very edge of the frame where our yard meets the street, stood the plague doctor figure, perfectly still, watching. Next clip, teenagers in zombie makeup grabbing candy. In the background, the plague doctor figure, same position, same stillness. Next clip, a family with a toddler in a pumpkin costume. Background, plague doctor. Every single clip, every single group that came to our door, the figure was there, always in the background, always at the edge of the frame, always watching. We'd watched dozens of these clips throughout the evening, commenting on the costumes, laughing at the cute kids. We'd never noticed the figure. Not once. It had been there the entire time, watching every interaction, and we hadn't seen it until we looked for it. My stomach twisted. I pulled up our neighbor's security system. We have a neighborhood watch app where we share footage. The Hendersons across the street have a camera that faces our house. I found their footage from Halloween night and watched with dawning horror. Their camera showed our porch, showed our bowl of candy, showed the entire evening, and their footage showed nothing. No kids came to our door, not one. The bowl sat undisturbed all night, full of candy, until it simply vanished at 10:47 p.m., the exact time the plague doctor figure had pointed at our camera. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, looking over my shoulder. We watched them. We saw them taking candy, but according to every other camera on our street, no trick-or-treaters came to our house at all. The only footage of any children at our door existed on our doorbell camera. Our camera, which had shown us something that wasn't there, or had shown us something that was there but invisible to every other recording device. I don't know which possibility is worse. We moved out 3 weeks later. Sold the house at a loss, didn't care. Left the doorbell camera behind, we weren't taking it with us. Started fresh in a new city, new jobs, new security system from a different company. For a while, we felt safe again. Then, last month, it started. My phone buzzes with notifications from an app I deleted, from a device that's still attached to a house we no longer own, in a city 200 miles away. The notifications show the plague doctor figure standing on porches. Different porches. The porches of every place we've lived since. Our old apartment, our rental house, our current home. The figure stands there, at the end of the walkway, perfectly still, just watching. The timestamps are from the middle of the night, 2:47 a.m., 3:33 a.m., 4:12 a.m. Hours when we're asleep and unaware. I contacted the doorbell company. They confirmed the device was deactivated and no longer tied to my account. These notifications shouldn't be possible, but they keep coming. Last night, I received another one. I made the mistake of opening it. The plague doctor figure stood on our current porch, but this time it wasn't standing still. It was reaching toward the camera, that gloved hand filling the frame, pointing directly at the lens, directly at me. The timestamp read, "Live." I threw the phone across the room. Sarah is terrified. We don't know what to do. We can't run from something that exists only in recordings, only for us, something that's been watching us through every camera we've ever owned, invisible to everyone else. And I'm haunted by a terrible question I can't answer. If it's been watching us all this time, what happens when it decides to stop watching and starts doing something else? What happens when it moves from the background to the foreground, from the camera's edge to our door? I'm afraid we're going to find out soon. I needed money for my first semester of college, and the seasonal work at Holloway Farms seemed perfect, decent pay for a fun job. I'd be a scare actor in their famous haunted corn maze, one of those Halloween attractions that people drove hours to experience. The farm had a reputation for putting on an incredible show, elaborate and professional. During my interview, they emphasized safety, showed me the emergency protocols, gave me a detailed map of the maze layout. Everything felt legitimate and well run. My costume was simple but effective. A ragged scarecrow outfit with a burlap mask, worn-out overalls, and plastic-looking straw glued to the fabric. I looked the part. My job was to hide in designated spots marked on my map, wait for groups to pass, and jump out at the perfect moment to make them scream. I'd then direct them back to the correct path if they looked lost. The farm had 5 of us working the maze, each covering a different section, and we communicated via radio to coordinate scares and handle any issues. The first 3 nights were great. I got into a rhythm, learned the timing, enjoyed hearing the screams followed by nervous laughter. The groups were good-natured, the other actors were friendly, and I was making solid money. It felt like the perfect Halloween job. On my 4th night, October 24th, things changed. It was a Thursday, so traffic was lighter. We had maybe 30 people total come through the maze between 7 and 9 p.m. I was positioned in Section C, a spot near the middle of the maze where 3 paths converged, creating confusion about which direction to take. My hiding spot was behind a false wall of corn stalks, and I had a perfect view of groups approaching from any direction. Around 8:15, during a lull between groups, I noticed something off about the maze wall to my left. There was a narrow gap between the corn stalks, maybe 18 inches wide, leading deeper into the field, away from the attraction, away from the designated paths. I'd been working this exact spot for 3 nights, and that gap hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I keyed my radio. "Hey, Mike, this is Section C. I've got a pathway here that's not on the map. Looks like someone pushed through the corn. Should I check it out?" Static. Then Mike's voice. "Section C. Negative. There are no paths off the designated route. You're probably seeing shadows. Stay at your position." But I wasn't seeing shadows. In the moonlight filtering through the corn stalks overhead, the gap was clearly visible. More than that, the corn forming this pathway looked different. Older. The stalks were gray and rotted, completely unlike the healthy green corn that made up the maze around me. My curiosity overrode my common sense. I was young, stupid, and convinced I'd found some secret part of the attraction they hadn't told us about yet. I stepped into the gap and followed the path. The sounds of the maze behind me, distant laughter, the other actors doing their routines, the PA system playing ambient horror music began to fade. The air temperature dropped noticeably. The corn stalks pressed close on both sides, and I had to turn sideways to squeeze through some sections. The smell changed too, not the fresh, almost sweet smell of corn, but something else. Something rotten and damp, like earth that hadn't been disturbed in decades. I checked my watch. 8:22 p.m. I'd give this 5 minutes, then head back. The path twisted and turned, making me lose my sense of direction. I should have been keeping track of my orientation, should have been thinking about how to find my way back, but I was pulled forward by a fascination I can't fully explain. Something wanted me to see what was at the end. After what felt like 10 minutes, but might have been longer, the narrow path opened into a clearing. The moon was bright overhead, illuminating the scene perfectly. 7 scarecrows stood in a circle, all facing inward toward a mound of earth in the center. These weren't attraction props. These were ancient, forgotten things that had been here far longer than Holloway Farm's Halloween maze. Their clothes were rotted to near transparency, hanging in strips from wooden frames. The hay stuffing spilled out from tears and holes, but the way it spilled looked wrong, too dark, too wet, more like organic matter than dried grass. The scarecrow heads were burlap sacks, crude faces painted on them in what might have once been red paint but had faded to rust brown. I stood at the edge of the clearing, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but I was frozen. The mound of earth in the center looked like a grave, an old grave, sunken and settled, with dead grass growing in patches over it. Something about the scene felt deeply, fundamentally wrong, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see, something that existed outside normal space. Then, with a sound like dry wood creaking, all 7 scarecrow heads slowly rotated to face me, in perfect unison. The movement was impossible. They were just poles with burlap sacks on top. No mechanics, no strings visible in the moonlight, but they moved anyway. And as they turned, I saw that the heads weren't filled with hay at all. Through the holes in the burlap, I glimpsed something that looked disturbingly organic, something dark and wet that might have been rotted flesh, with pale things that could have been bone fragments. The painted faces seemed to stare at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I ran. Blind panic overrode everything else. I crashed back into the path I'd come from. branches and cornstalks slapping my face, my scarecrow costume catching and tearing on the dried corn. I didn't care about direction anymore, just distance. I burst out onto the main maze path so suddenly that a group of 4 teenagers screamed in genuine terror, thinking my appearance was part of the show. Mike found me 20 minutes later, sitting on the ground, still shaking. He walked me back to the area I'd described, me pointing out where the gap had been. We stood there with our flashlights, examining the maze wall. Solid cornstalks, no gaps, no paths, no breaks in the regular pattern of the maze structure. Mike looked at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion, probably wondering if I was high. But when we looked down at my boots, we both went quiet. They were covered in rotted corn husks, the gray, ancient kind I'd walked through in that impossible path. The knees of my overalls were caked in dark earth that smelled like decay, and under my fingernails was dirt that I'd gotten from steadying myself against the cornstalks, dirt that shouldn't have been there if I'd never left the maze. The farm's owner, Mr. Holloway, grandson of the original owner, pulled me aside at the end of the night. He was an older man, probably 70, with tired eyes that had seen things he didn't want to talk about. He asked me to describe exactly what I'd seen. When I finished, he nodded slowly, like he'd heard this before. "The land we built the maze on used to be old Holloway's farm," he said quietly. Back in 1952, 7 migrant workers were hired for the harvest. Middle of October, they went into the east field to work and never came back. Search parties went out, police investigated, but those 7 men vanished like they'd never existed. The field where they disappeared, that's where we built the maze. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Every few years, someone working the maze reports seeing things, paths that shouldn't be there, things in the corn. Most people shrug it off, finish their shift, maybe have weird dreams for a while. But some people, the ones who actually find the clearing, who see the scarecrows, they know better. They don't come back. He looked at me directly. "You seem like a smart kid. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll say this. Some places remember what happened to them. Some places hold on to their dead, and some places don't like being reminded that they're still holding on. If I were you, I'd collect tonight's pay and find different work." I took his advice, picked up my check that night, never went back, never even drove past the farm again, but I can't escape it entirely. I have nightmares about that clearing, about those 7 heads turning in unison. Worst are the dreams where I see their faces clearly, not the painted burlap masks, but the faces underneath, pressed against the fabric from the inside, trying to push through. The expressions I glimpse in those dreams are twisted with suffering and rage, and they're trying to tell me something I'm grateful I can't understand. I still see scarecrows sometimes, in other places, normal fields, Halloween decorations, and sometimes, just for a second, I see one of those heads turned slightly toward me. I blink, and it's back to normal, but the feeling stays, the certainty that I'm being watched by something that remembers I found their resting place, something that's waiting patiently for me to make another wrong turn, to follow another path that shouldn't exist, to wander into a place I'll never leave. The annual Halloween parade in our town was the kind of tradition that made you love living in a small community. Main Street transformed every October 31st into a celebration that brought out everyone, families with young kids, teenagers, elderly couples who'd watched this parade for 50 years. Local businesses sponsored floats, the high school marching band performed, and people wore costumes ranging from store-bought to elaborate homemade creations. It was wholesome, classic Americana, and I'd looked forward to taking my 6-year-old daughter Emma to experience it. Emma had been excited for weeks, finally settling on a princess costume, pink dress, plastic tiara, a wand that lit up when you pressed a button. We arrived at Main Street around 1 p.m., an hour before the parade started, and found a perfect spot on the sidewalk near the town square. We were surrounded by other families, everyone in good spirits, kids comparing costumes and clutching bags for candy. The parade started right on time. First came the mayor's car, then the marching band playing a spirited rendition of Monster Mash, then a series of floats from various sponsors. Emma bounced on her toes, waving at everyone who passed. I took dozens of photos, wanting to capture her joy. The parade was exactly what I'd hoped it would be. About 45 minutes in, a group of costumed walkers came by, people dressed as various Halloween monsters. I saw a werewolf, a vampire, a mummy, a zombie, all walking together and interacting with the crowd. Emma tugged my sleeve and pointed toward the back of the group. "Mommy, look at that one." I followed her finger and saw a figure that stood out from the others. A tall, Victorian-era costume, all in black, a long dress that dragged along the pavement, an elaborate hat with black lace trim, and a mask that made my breath catch. It was a child's face rendered in cracked porcelain, the kind of antique doll face that always unsettled me. The expression was blank but somehow conveyed sadness. The figure walked slowly, mechanically, each step measured and deliberate. As the group passed our position, the porcelain-masked figure stopped. The parade continued moving around it, but this figure stood completely still for several long seconds, its masked face turned directly toward Emma. I felt my protective instincts flare. Something about the attention felt wrong, but then the figure resumed walking, catching up with its group, and the moment passed. After the parade ended, we walked to the town square festival area for the post-parade activities, carnival games, food vendors, various Halloween attractions. Emma wanted to ride the carousel, and as we approached it, I noticed the porcelain-masked figure standing near the ticket booth, about 50 feet away. The figure was completely motionless, despite the crowd moving around it, and I had the distinct impression it was watching us, probably just taking a break, I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the prickle of unease running down my spine. We rode the carousel, Emma choosing a white horse with a golden mane. As we went around, I scanned the crowd with each rotation, and I spotted the figure again, now standing near the face-painting booth, still as a statue. The same Victorian costume, the same porcelain mask. It was too far away to see details, but I knew with certainty it was facing our direction. Over the next hour, I saw the figure multiple times, standing behind the dunking booth, visible through the crowd at the ring toss game, positioned at the entrance to the children's haunted house. Every time, it was completely motionless, a still point in the moving crowd, and every time, I had the feeling it was watching us specifically. Other people walked past the figure without seeming to notice it. No one else seemed disturbed by this tall, Victorian-era ghost standing like a statue in various locations throughout the festival. Emma was having too much fun for me to drag her away based on my paranoid feelings, so I tried to ignore the figure. But when Emma said she needed to use the bathroom, and I saw the figure standing directly outside the women's restroom entrance near the park, my patience snapped. "Stay right here," I told Emma, positioning her next to a park bench in sight of other families. I marched toward the figure, rehearsing in my head what I'd say to whoever was inside that costume about following us. As I got closer, details became clearer. The dress was genuinely antique, the fabric aged and slightly moth-eaten, the lace trim handmade. The porcelain mask showed fine cracks spreading from the eyes, and I could see dark, hollow spaces behind them where the wearer's eyes should be visible. But I saw nothing in those darkness, no glint of human eyes. I was 10 feet away, close enough to reach out and touch the figure, when Ted Garner, the parade route coordinator whom I knew from the PTA, walked directly through the space where the figure stood. He was checking his clipboard, not paying attention to where he was going, and he passed through that spot through it like nothing was there. The figure vanished the instant he passed through it, like fog dispersing. My stomach dropped. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then my protective instincts overrode everything else. I grabbed Emma's hand and headed straight for our car in the parking lot 2 blocks away. I didn't explain, didn't stop to talk to anyone, just moved with purpose while my heart hammered against my ribs. As I buckled Emma into her car seat, my hands shaking enough that I fumbled with the buckle twice, Emma spoke in a small, confused voice. "Mommy, why are we leaving? And why was that sad girl following us all day?" I turned to look at her, my blood running cold. "What sad girl, sweetheart?" "The one in the mask. She was standing behind you during the whole parade. She had her hands on your shoulders and she looked so sad. I thought she was your friend." I felt the world tilt. She was behind me? The whole time?" Emma nodded. "And when you were buying cotton candy, she leaned down and whispered something to me. She said, 'Tell Mommy I've been waiting.'" "Why has she been waiting, Mommy? Waiting for what?" I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing. That night, after Emma was asleep, I pulled out my old photo albums from storage, driven by a terrible suspicion I couldn't articulate. I found pictures from my childhood, flipping through until I reached October 1989. I would have been 6 years old, Emma's age. There were several photos from the Halloween parade that year, me in my witch costume, my mother standing beside me, both of us smiling. In the third photograph, I saw it. In the background, partially obscured by the crowd but clearly visible, was the Victorian-era figure with the porcelain mask. It stood directly behind my mother, and though the photo quality wasn't perfect, I could see its hands positioned on my mother's shoulders, the same way Emma described it standing behind me. My mother died that night. Car accident driving home from the parade. A truck ran a red light and hit the driver's side of our car. I survived with minor injuries. She died instantly. I'd been 6 years old, the same age Emma was now. I sat in my living room at 2 a.m, staring at that photograph, trying to understand what it meant. Was this thing some kind of curse? A pattern repeating across generations? Was it death itself, announcing its presence, marking its targets? The questions multiplied with no answers, and all I knew for certain was that something had marked me that Halloween in 1989, something that had waited 36 years to appear again, now marking my daughter. We moved 3 states away that spring. I told everyone it was for a better job opportunity, but really I was running from something I didn't understand. I enrolled Emma in a different school, tried to start over. For a while, I thought we'd escaped. Then, a few months ago, Emma started mentioning the sad girl again. She sees her standing outside her bedroom window at night, she says, just standing in our backyard, waiting patiently by the glass, wearing that Victorian dress and porcelain mask. Emma isn't scared, she says. The girl looks so sad that she almost wants to let her inside. That's what terrifies me most. Whatever this thing is, it's patient. It's been waiting since 1989, maybe longer. It followed me from that parade, waited decades, and now it's focused on my daughter. I keep Emma's curtains closed at night now. I've installed motion sensor lights in the backyard that should trigger if anything's there, but they never go off. Yet Emma still sees her, standing just beyond the glass, hands raised as if she's about to knock, asking to be let in. And I don't know how to protect my daughter from something that exists outside normal rules, something that's been waiting for over 3 decades with impatience that suggests it has all the time in the world. Something that marked my mother, then marked me, and is now marking Emma. I'm afraid that I'm watching a pattern repeat, and I don't know how to break it before it reaches the same terrible conclusion. I needed money. I was 16, had my eye on a car I couldn't afford, and when the Crenshaws offered me $150 to house sit on Halloween night while they attended a wedding 3 states away, I jumped at it. $150 for sitting in a big house, watching TV, and handing out candy? It seemed like the easiest money I'd ever make. The Crenshaws lived in the kind of house that looked like it was designed specifically for Halloween. A massive Victorian at the end of Sycamore Lane, 3 stories of dark wood and gingerbread trim, with a wraparound porch and a yard that hadn't been properly maintained in years. The house was surrounded by old oak trees that created perpetual shadow even on sunny days. It looked like every haunted house from every movie, which should have been my first warning. Mrs. Crenshaw gave me the rundown on October 31st, around 5 p.m., before they left. The instructions are simple, she said, her tone serious in a way that made me pay extra attention. Hand out candy to trick-or-treaters until 9 p.m. Keep the porch light on until then, no later. Don't go into the basement under any circumstances. And absolutely, under no circumstances do you let anyone inside the house. Do you understand? Sure, I said, but I must have looked confused because she gripped my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. I need you to promise me, specifically about not letting anyone inside, no matter who they are, no matter what they say, no matter how convincing they sound. Nobody comes inside. Promise me. I promise. Nobody inside. Got it. She made me repeat the promise 2 more times before she seemed satisfied. Mr. Crenshaw gave me an apologetic look that said, "She's always like this. Just humor her." And they left in their car, headed to the wedding. I was alone in the big Victorian house, with a bowl full of candy and a sense that maybe this job would be a little weirder than I'd anticipated. The evening started fine. As it got dark, kids started arriving in groups of 3 or 4, parents waiting at the curb while children ran up to the porch. I handed out candy, complimented costumes, fell into an easy rhythm. The house was kind of creepy inside. Lots of old furniture, family portraits on the walls, floors that creaked with every step, but nothing I couldn't handle. I kept the TV on in the living room for company and checked my phone between trick-or-treaters. Around 8:30, the flow of kids stopped. Usually there's a trickle until 9, stragglers and teenagers, but the street outside went quiet. I checked my phone. 8:37 p.m. 23 minutes until I could turn off the porch light and officially be done with my responsibilities. I settled onto the couch, scrolling through social media, half watching a Halloween special on TV. At 8:45, there was a heavy knock at the door. Not the enthusiastic knocking of kids excited for candy, but a slow, deliberate pounding. 3 heavy knocks that echoed through the house. I got up, grabbed the candy bowl, and opened the door. 3 teenagers stood on the porch, older than trick-or-treating age, probably 17 or 18. They wore cheap plastic horror masks, a zombie with rotted green flesh, a werewolf with brown fur, and a witch with a hooked nose. But their body language was wrong. They stood too still, too straight, and there was an odd quality to how they positioned themselves, too symmetrical, too deliberate, like actors hitting their marks. "Trick or treat," the one in the zombie mask said, but the tone was flat, perfunctory, like they were saying the words because they were required, not because they meant them. "You guys are a little old for this, aren't you?" I tried to make it sound joking, friendly, but my instincts were already prickling with unease. "Our car broke down up the road," the witch said, her voice oddly monotone behind the mask. "Can we come inside to use your phone?" I can make a call for you. Who do you need me to call?" The 3 figures didn't respond immediately. They stood there, masks staring at me, and I became acutely aware of how dark it had gotten, how quiet the neighborhood was, how far the next house was down the lane. "We don't need you to call anyone," the werewolf said slowly. "We need to come inside. You should let us in." The way he said "should," it wasn't a request or even a suggestion. It was stated as a fact, as something that was supposed to happen, and my refusal was an aberration in the natural order. "Mrs. Crenshaw's warnings echoed in my head. "Sorry, I can't let anyone inside. House rules. But I'm happy to make a call for you, or you can use my phone out here if you need to." "You should let us in," the witch repeated, taking 1 step closer to the threshold. "It would be better if you let us in." My heart was pounding now. Something was deeply wrong. These weren't teenagers looking for help. I didn't know what they were, but every instinct I had was screaming danger. "You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." I stepped back and swung the door closed, slamming it harder than necessary, and threw the deadbolt. My hands were shaking. I stood in the entryway, listening, and after a moment, I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate footsteps that began to circle the house. For the next hour, I heard them, walking around the wraparound porch, their footsteps echoing on the old wood. Testing windows, I'd hear a soft rattling as they tried to lift the sashes, jiggling door handles, trying the back door, the side door, every possible entry point. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher sounded bored. "Halloween night, honey? We've got calls backed up for hours. Drunk teenagers, pranks, noise complaints. What's your emergency?" "There are people trying to break into the house I'm staying at. They're trying all the windows and doors." "Are they actively breaking anything? Smashing windows? Kicking doors?" "No, but then they're probably just teenagers messing with you. It's Halloween. If they actually break something or you feel you're in immediate danger, call back and we'll prioritize you. Otherwise, an officer will come by when one becomes available." She hung up. I was alone with the sound of footsteps circling the house, of windows being tested, of door handles being turned slowly, carefully, as if checking whether I'd forgotten to lock one. At 9:47, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I waited in the living room, lights off, barely breathing. 20 minutes passed with no sound at all. Finally, I crept to the front window and carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The 3 figures stood on the front lawn, maybe 30 feet from the porch. They were perfectly still, facing the house. As I watched, They reached up in unison and removed their masks, holding them at their sides. In the porch light, I could see their faces clearly for the first time. They weren't teenagers. They weren't anything that should exist. Their faces were smooth, too smooth, like wax or plastic, with features that were almost human but not quite right. The proportions were slightly off, the symmetry too perfect, the skin too uniform in texture. They looked like mannequins, or extremely expensive dolls, or uncanny valley CGI rendered in flesh. Their eyes didn't blink. Their chests didn't rise and fall with breathing. They stood there for another 10 minutes, just staring at the house. At me, though I don't know if they could actually see me through the window. Then, without any signal I could detect, they turned in unison and walked away into the darkness beyond the streetlights, their movements perfectly synchronized. I didn't move from that spot until I saw the Crenshaw's car pull into the driveway at 6:30 the next morning. Mr. Crenshaw took one look at my face and went pale. I told them everything, the words tumbling out. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Wait here," he said finally, and he led me through the house to a door I'd noticed before the basement door, the one place I'd been explicitly forbidden to go. He opened it, turned on the lights, and led me down wooden stairs into a finished basement. One wall was covered with newspaper clippings, all in protective plastic sleeves, all carefully organized by date. I stepped closer and started reading. The 31st of October 1982, 2 residents missing after Halloween night. The 31st of October 1991, local woman vanishes from Sycamore Lane home. October 31, 2003, couple disappears on Halloween, car found, owners missing. The 31st of October 2011, Halloween mystery, man leaves party, never arrives home, last seen on Sycamore Lane. Every article was about Halloween night. Every article was about people disappearing from houses on Sycamore Lane. Every article included witness statements describing people who had last been seen leaving with strangers who looked wrong or didn't seem quite human or moved in an odd way. "My family has owned this house for 4 generations," Mr. Crenshaw said quietly, "and for as long as anyone can remember, every Halloween, 3 figures come to houses on this lane. They ask to be let inside. They're very convincing, very persistent, and everyone who has ever invited them in, who has ever opened that door and said, 'Come in,' has walked away with them and never been seen again." He looked at me with an expression of profound weariness. "We don't know what they are. We don't know what they want or where they take people. We just know they come back every year, and they need an invitation. They need to be let inside. And if you don't invite them in, if you refuse them, they leave. Eventually, but if you do let them in," he gestured at the wall of clippings, "you leave with them, you walk into the night, and nobody ever finds you." He paid me in cash, double what we'd agreed on, and made me promise never to tell anyone what I'd seen. I promised, though I don't think he believed me. I never house sat again, never took a job on Halloween night, moved away from that town the moment I turned 18. But I've kept one habit ever since. On Halloween night, I don't answer my door. Not for anyone. Not for children in costumes. Not for neighbors. Not for delivery drivers. Not for anyone. Because sometimes, around 8:45 p.m., I hear that slow, heavy knocking, 3 deliberate pounds that echo through whatever house I'm living in. No matter how far I've moved, no matter how many years have passed, and when I peek through the window, I see 3 figures standing on my walkway, their faces too smooth, their movements too synchronized, waiting patiently for me to make the mistake of inviting them inside. They're patient. They've been doing this for decades, maybe longer. And they remember me, the one who refused them, the one who got away. Someday, I'm afraid I'll forget to lock a door, or I'll be too tired to remember the danger, and I'll hear that voice saying, "You should let us in," and I'll find myself agreeing, opening the door, walking into the night with them to a place I'll never return from. Until then, I just wait, year after year, for that knock that always comes.